Hello everyone and welcome to my tutorial on how to do a hip shimmy. Now first things first, you need to know where your hips are. So the part that's sticking out of your body like this, these are the hips. So this is the core and these are the thighs. Every time you want to do any movement that involves using the hips, you should always have your knees bent and slightly relaxed. You can't do any hip movements with straight knees or locked knees because the moment you lock your knees like this, your hips have no pivot point to move. So your knees need to be bent and slightly relaxed in order to provide that pivot point so that the hips can move freely. This applies for any kind of hip movement, whether it's a hip shimmy, a hip twist, or even a figure eight. So in this video, we're going to focus on the hip shimmy. So make sure first that your posture is correct. Besides having the knees bent and slightly relaxed, you must also make sure that you've got your core engaged and your upper body is pulled up. You can't be doing any physical moves with very poor posture because then you might pull a muscle that you didn't mean to pull or didn't even know existed. So that's why it's important that when you're practicing, always make sure that you have good posture. So your upper body should be pulled up, your shoulders should be over your hips, core tucked in, and then your knee should be bent and slightly relaxed. Now, as you're doing this posture, make sure that nothing is stiff because the moment you stiffen or tighten any muscles, again, you might accidentally pull a muscle because when something is tight and you're trying to make it move, it's like trying to move a very stiff stick. You might end up snapping something instead. So make sure that you're relaxed, but good form, core engaged. Now, in case you're wondering, how do we engage a core while keeping the muscles relaxed? That will be a discussion for another time. Now, let's just focus on the hip shimmy. So good posture, important thing is the knees must be bent and slightly relaxed. What you need to do is focus on the side of your hips. So if you don't know how to move your hips, have your hands placed on either side of your hips, right on the sides like this. So not forward, not back, right on the side. I want you to think of pushing your hands with your hips. So you'll find that your hips will move side to side. Now, in reality, if you watch yourself in the mirror, you'll find that your hips are not actually moving side to side like a typewriter. You'll find that your hips will seem to be moving up and down. And that's very natural because of the way that your body is shaped. Here's your middle. Your hips are here. So when your hips are moving to the side, one hip will naturally go up and one hip will naturally move down. When the other hip moves to the side, it seems to go up while the other hip will move down. So that's why even though you're actually pushing from side to side, it will look as if your hips are moving up and down. Perfectly normal. However, having said that, don't actually aim for up and down because what will happen then is you will start to strain your back muscles instead. Just aim for a hip side to side and just accept that your hips will be moving up and down like what sometimes are called a smiley. So in a hip shimmy, you're aiming to move the hip as quickly as possible when moving side to side. The thing is, the power in the hip shimmy does not come from the hips, but it comes from the thighs. It's just that you initiate the movement with your hips. So for beginners, we always suggest that you focus on the hips first because you need to know which body part to move correctly. If you focus on using your thighs initially, you're going to end up moving in the wrong direction and you could be doing a completely different dance movement instead. So for beginners, focus on your hips side to side first. Once you know how to move your hips from side to side, then what we do is we aim to increase speed. So for speed and power, that comes from the thighs. So you need to learn how to move your hips side to side while using the muscle power from within. As you're moving your hips, of course, you will naturally find that your knees will move. Again, this is normal physical anatomy. Your muscles and your bones are connected in such a way that any movement on the hips will, of course, cause the knees to move because, as I mentioned earlier, your knees are a pivot point. However, do not aim to move your knees. How you can tell is that when you move your hips, you will see your hips moving from side to side. Your knees moving are just a side product of your hips moving. But if you move your knees, you'll find that your hip movement is very little or even non-existent. So that's how you can tell whether you're doing the hip shimmy correctly. So when practicing your hip shimmy, remember, good posture, bend your knees, and focus on moving your hips side to side. And as you get better, build up the speed. And that's how you do a hip shimmy. Practice, practice, and I'll see you on the dance floor.